Thank you to Professor Robert Paquette and the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the honor of giving the General Josiah Bunting Annual Veterans Day lecture. I'd like to share my thoughts on the quiet dignity of military service, why it is still held in high esteem, and how on this Veterans Day we should pause to think deeply about service, integrity, humility, and sacrifice to one's country. Before there was a Veterans Day in our country, we celebrated the anniversary of the ending of World War I on November 11th, 1918. It was called Armistice Day. Then, on October the 12th, 1954, former five-star Army General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who is now the president, issued a proclamation declaring that the act approved by Congress on June the 1st, 1954, which expanded the significance of November 11th and declared it a legal holiday, which observed Armistice Day, was to be forever known as Veterans Day. In that proclamation, President Eisenhower called on citizens to give, and I quote, "tribute to those who have thus added strength to the nation and in renewed dedication to their work, building peace with honor among all nations," end quote. Think about that for a moment. Give, quote, "tribute to those who have thus added strength to the nation," unquote. This was the same Eisenhower who, 10 years before, on June 1st, 1944, as the Supreme Allied Commander, gave the go-ahead for Operation Overlord, D-Day, the largest amphibious attack in world history. Eisenhower's order of that day was pivotal. It was brief. He said, quote, "Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking." The outcome of D-Day was by no means assured, but it was noble. Over 2,500 Americans died that day on the beaches of Normandy, and we know the names: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword, and that space headland between Utah and Omaha called Pont de Hoc. Over 4,400 men died that day just in the first hour. But Eisenhower, along with FDR and Churchill, knew that to win the war and defeat Hitler and Nazism, they must liberate German-occupied France. Thousands more men died between that day and Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day, 11 months later on May 8th, 1945. But 10 years later, when the Supreme Allied Commander was the President of the United States, he called on us to give tribute to those veterans who gave strength to this nation. Eisenhower's choice of words, "give strength to this nation," remain as true today as they were at the beginning of our republic. From the colonists who fought to give strength to the concept of a new nation, radical at the time, a country with laws of the people, by the people, and for the people, against a tyrannical king, to the nameless women and men who were deployed in more than 150 countries this day, each in his own way giving strength to our country. Our experiences in uniform are not, however, unique to Americans. Veterans who fought and died for their country did so, with some exceptions, to strengthen their country. I want to share two such stories with you. First, May 8th, 1995. It was the 50th anniversary of VE Day, and I was a young Navy lieutenant stationed at the U.S. Naval Headquarters for Europe in London, England. The wardroom, that's the U.S. Navy officers, were invited to attend the formal ceremony and military flyover, or fly past as the British call it, in Hyde Park. It was a warm, sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. I got up early and made my way to the Royal Enclosure, as U.S. Navy officers were invited to be near the main stage. As I was waiting for the ceremonies to begin that afternoon, hundreds of World War II vets, all British men, walked slowly toward the Royal Enclosure. Some had walkers, some were in wheelchairs, some made their way on their own accord. Each wear gray slacks, a white dress shirt, a rep tie, blue blazers, and campaign medals on their lapels. They were the same age as my father, who also fought in the war as an enlisted man in the U.S. Navy. When the ceremonies began, I am standing shoulder to shoulder with these vets. The main ceremony was taking place over at Buckingham Palace, about 2 miles away in London. There, throngs of spectators listened to 1940-era songs sung during the war that were being sung live, accompanied by a military band. The palace forecourt was transformed into an open-air stage. It was a festive atmosphere. The speeches, the music, and the festivities were played on large screens in Hyde Park and all around the park, where I, along with about 1 million other people, gathered to celebrate and remember. Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, 94 years old, stood on the very same balcony at Buckingham Palace where she stood 50 years before when VE Day was celebrated. Dressed in a pale, lovely yellow dress, the Queen Mum, beloved by all in the crowd, spoke, and this is what she said. This day will bring back many memories to many people, and I do hope that all those who go to those many ceremonies will remember, with pride and gratitude, those men and women, armed and unarmed, whose courage really helped bring us to victory. God bless them all." Unquote. World War II era planes did a fly past, that's what the British call it, we call it a flyby, over Buckingham Palace and Hyde Park, and the 1 million+ spectators. You can see this on YouTube today. A swordfish, a havar, a firefly, a Bristol Blenheim, a Catalina, the DC-3, the workhorse of the war, a Lancaster, the B-17, the Flying Fortress, a Mosquito, a Hurricane, a Meteor, and finally 9 Red Arrow, modern-day British jets in formation, catching the sunlight, streaming red, white, and blue smoke behind them. Later that evening, at exactly 8:38 p.m., the time the war ended in Europe, the entire nation held 2 minutes of silence. I'm standing there in Hyde Park in the Royal Enclosure, shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of men who fought in that war. It was dead quiet. The sun was still up, but cast shadows across the vast green park. Cars and buses stop. The noise of the city genuflects to the moment, and we bow our heads. At first, I don't know what it is. I feel it as much as I hear it. It's soft, muzzled. I feel my shoulders moving up and down ever so slightly. And then I realize what it is. Men, warriors, stoically crying, softly, remembering, alone, yet together. The men that liberated the free world, whom I had the privilege of standing next to, had been overcome by the emotions of the day and were remembering. But in their very British way, they grieved in silence, humble, like so many of my father's generation. When General Josiah Bunting gave the first of these inaugural addresses, now named after him, he spoke of modesty, humility. He lamented the lack of modesty in modern society, saying, quote, a quality of character that is almost non-existent today is modesty, unquote. He said that modesty is the ability to do what is necessary without need for recompense, that your conscience should be your guiding force. It may seem odd to say, but one of the qualities of leadership I have admired most in military women and men, officers and enlisted, is a quiet sense of modesty. That's not the way Hollywood portrays military people, but what do they know? Perhaps it is because in a meritocracy like the military, we know that many have gone before us and given the last full measure, and that we hope quietly in our own minds that we too would have the courage to do the right thing if and when called into battle. Knowing that you may die for your country and that millions of other patriots before you have done so has a way of molding your character. As I'm standing there among those men who served and survived World War II, I couldn't help but think of how my father's service in the Pacific in World War II had shaped his character too. He rarely spoke of his own service. One of his ships was kamikazed and almost sank. He survived, only to be tasked with removing the bloated remains of fellow sailors and Marines from the hold of his ship. Instead, my dad, like those men standing next to me, I surmised, thought of their shipmates, their brothers in arms who died during or after the war. Lives lived to the fullest. They made their country stronger. It was a day I'll never forget, and the highlight of my 27 years of service in the Navy. It was more meaningful, honestly, than my 2 tours as a commanding officer, my deployments to Africa or serving with the SEALs as their JAG, or being stationed in Europe during the war in the Balkans, or frankly, anything I have done in my tours on active duty or in my 27 years in uniform. That's the first story. We are a country of over 328 million people. Yet today, less than 0.5% of the population currently serves, representing 1.3 million active duty personnel and about 600,000 reservists. You're more likely to know or have met a police officer, a firefighter, a doctor, teacher, or nurse than a person serving in the military. There are over 3.7 million teachers in this country, about 700,000 police officers, 1.1 million firefighters, 1 million doctors, and 3.8 million nurses. Each is a noble and important profession. But there is something unique and different about military service that most in our country still admire, emulate, and revere. Vets have certain skills, experiences, leadership qualities, and a sense of honor and duty that is not replicated in any other profession. At a time when fewer and fewer young people are even physically able to qualify for military service, and less than 0.5% even serve, we still send vets to Congress in large percentages. In this last Congress, almost 20% of the United States Senate were veterans. 77 of the 435 members of the House of Representatives are vets. It's about 17%. 48 members of Congress served in the military after the year 2000. 7 senators received the Congressional Medal of Honor, including Bob Kerrey from Nebraska and Daniel Inouye from Hawaii. Each man and woman gave strength to our country. My second story. In the summer of 2019, I took my family, including my 4 kids, all of whom we adopted from Russia, to France. We wanted, like so many parents, to bring history education to life through travel. My dad, a World War II vet, and my wife's dad, a Korean vet, knew the value of travel in one's education. It's one thing to study D-Day in school, or the French Revolution, or Louis XIV, or read The Hunchback of Notre Dame in your English class, or look at a book and peer into the eyes of the Mona Lisa, or stare at Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait, or look at a architecture or other book and marvel at Monet's water lilies, or look at pictures of the Eiffel Tower or Chartres Cathedral, or the Sistine Chapel or Les Emilades in Paris. But it's another thing to be there, to see it, to smell the smells, to see the distances between things yourself. It's another thing to smell the salt water raging around the Atlantic as you peer over the cliff at Pont du Hoc. And so we went. To make the most of our time at D-Day, I hired the best private guide I could find to take us on a day-long tour of the beaches from dawn to past dusk. Having been there with my parents in the 1970s and 80s, having been there myself in the 1980s when I was studying overseas, and with my wife in the 1990s when we were stationed in Europe, I thought I knew those beaches, those stories, those sacrifices. Well, I was wrong. Arnold Villain Malbaud, Igor for short, was our guide. A former member of the French Foreign Legion who grew up in Normandy, who spoke 6 languages, studied philosophy and history, and had a master's degree in the D-Day battle, started our tour in, of all places, Le Combe. I'd never heard of it. It's close to Omaha, 25 kilometers from Bayeux, where we had stayed. 21,200 men and boys are buried there, under dark granite crosses and small plaques on the ground. In the middle of the huge graveyard, pushing 20 meters up into the sky, is a really large grass mound with a tall black cross on the top. There's actually a path that goes the whole way up to the top, and you can walk it. It takes about 10 minutes to walk up it. Underneath that mound are unidentified remains and limbs of people who died during the invasion and the fight to liberate France. When I asked Igor what Le Combe was and why we started the tour there, he said, quote, "They fought and died for their country, too. We tend to forget that." After a pause, he pointed to several gravestones and said, "Those boys were 14 years old." I walked over. I read their names. It was a German cemetery. Over 20,000 German boys and men, many of whom were not loyal to Hitler or devoted Nazis, did their duty and gave the last full measure. It was a fitting start to an emotional day which ended at the American cemetery at dusk with taps and the lowering of the American flag amidst the perfect rows of pristine white crosses and Jewish stars. It may seem odd to you, but on Veterans Day, when we think about the dignity of military service and thank vets for their service, many of us thank you, the American people, for supporting our service. Many of today's veterans are the sons and daughters of vets themselves. It's a family tradition. My family is no more unique than anyone else's. My dad went into the Navy at 17 years of age during World War II, and he served in the Pacific. He was with the Gator Navy. He served like his dad, who was a Navy pilot in the 20s, because it was the right thing to do. My dad died at the age of 80 after a life well lived in 2004. He died from pulmonary fibrosis, from asbestos from the Victory ships that he rode on during World War II. Before he died, I gave him a copy of Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation. When I asked him what he thought of the book, he said, "I don't agree with the title." Puzzled, I asked, "Well, why's that, Dad?" And he said, "Every generation of Americans is the greatest. We were just doing our duty." Modesty. After my dad passed away, I found an old trunk in my parents' attic. Inside, I found dozens of letters to and from my dad and his mother written during World War II. His dad had died when he was 6. He kept all of those letters. They're beautiful letters. Some about the day-to-day life aboard the ship, others about shipmates he was serving with, and others about the food, always the food. My dad's nickname was Seagull because he would eat anything, and others much more personal. You veterans know these letters, or emails, or texts. A baby's first step, first words, an uncle who passed away, the dog had puppies, your daughter cries herself to sleep at night because you're not there, etc. It is you, our family members and loved ones, sometimes pure strangers, who reach out and tell us how much you miss us, support us, and love us. And so I say, for your letters, care packages, emails, Skypes, voicemails, texts, and personal thank yous, we are eternally grateful. When evil attacked us on 9/11, my wife, Laura, and I realized that I'd probably get recalled back to active duty, as I was a reservist. Her dad had been in the Navy. We knew it would probably be a long war. I got the call at about 7 a.m. I was being deployed. Laura was in California on a business trip. I was in D.C., she was in California. I called her and woke her up. It was only 4 a.m. there. After I told her the news, it was a brief call, and she ended it by saying, "Do your duty." Her response was no different than the responses of other spouses across this great country since the very beginning when duty calls. And so I say to you, to our family members, especially our spouses, thank you for giving us the moral support to do our duty. Most of those who serve do so for love of country. We're not heroes. And frankly, we don't like it when people call us heroes. or others who served heroes, because there are real heroes, and we are reminded of them as we serve. Take Ross McGinnis, for example. A typical young man, Ross McGinnis grew up in the small town of Knox, Pennsylvania. He lived there with his two older sisters, Katie and Becky, and his parents. He worked at the local McDonald's, and like a lot of guys, liked music and cars more than school. But with his nation at war, unlike most of his peers, Ross joined the Army. On December the 4th, 2006, then 19-year-old PFC Ross McGinnis was manning a .50 caliber machine gun atop a Humvee in Baghdad when a terrorist threw a grenade through the gunner's hatch. He reacted immediately, shouted a warning to his 4 crew members, and then dropped onto the Humvee ground and covered the grenade with his body. He was killed instantly. In 2008, his parents received his Medal of Honor at the White House. The next day at the Pentagon, there was a ceremony in his honor. The 4 soldiers he saved were there in attendance. Each spoke of Ross's sacrifice and talked about the debt everyone owed to him. But when Ross's dad got up to speak, he looked at the 4 men, the soldiers, and he told them the following, quote, "You can't be expected to live the rest of your lives living up to something or paying back something. It can't be carried as a debt. A debt is something you can repay. A gift is something for you to enjoy. So live your lives, enjoy your lives, because it was a gift." Ross McGinnis's actions represent the highest gift of military service. His service made our country stronger. After I was commissioned as an officer in the Navy in 1992, I was assigned to Naval Station, 32nd Street, Naval Station, San Diego. I drove across the country with my dad, my old Saab 900, who served, as I mentioned, as a Navy signalman in the Pacific, mostly with the Marines on troop transport ships. When the war ended, Dad was discharged from the Navy in San Diego at 32nd Street and took the train home from 32nd Street up to Seattle. But his last barracks was on 32nd Street, Naval Station, San Diego. When we got to 32nd Street, after our 4-day trek across the country, he wanted to see if his old barracks were still there on the naval station. Now, being the all-knowing, all-powerful lieutenant junior grade that I was, I assured my dad, who was a mere enlisted man who I now outranked, that there was no way that that building was still there. It was 1993, Dad. Come on. Well, you know what happened. My dad was right. The building was still there. It wasn't a barracks anymore. It had been converted to a modern building. And now was the Navy courthouse, where I would try cases as a JAG. Every day I strode into that courthouse, I thought of second-class signalman Douglas Joseph Stimson, serving his country in a time of war. Felt right. Some of you may have a family tradition of serving. You have those black and white photographs proudly displayed on the walls of your home. Your service was inspired by their service. Our country is enriched and strengthened by both. Today, when we travel in uniform, you thank us for our service, Most of us are just speechless as we know in our heart that it is we who are the lucky ones. We could not think of our lives without our service, because it is our service that brings the most meaning to and defines our lives. It wasn't long ago that things were very different. During Vietnam, some of our fellow Americans were mistreated and disrespected by those who found the war unpopular. I hope we never repeat that sad saga again. But it is through our service to this country that we have come to love her more deeply. Vets know every word of the Star-Spangled Banner and the Pledge of Allegiance, and sing or say each with pride. We are puzzled by people who take a knee, but defend their right to do so. And unlike others who fight for a king or a dictator or a tyrant, we take an oath not to or for a person, but to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Our country is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed, set forth most clearly in the Declaration of Independence, the greatest and most universal statement of self-government ever to exist. Our Constitution and the Bill of Rights promulgates those guiding principles, those first principles, that live in the DNA of every member of the U.S. Armed Forces. That all men were created equal, that we are endowed with inalienable rights from God, and chief among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our all-volunteer force is truly remarkable in the history of the world. It is the finest global force for good the world has ever seen. We liberated millions in Western Europe from the evils of Nazism. It was because of our military resolve and might that we won the Cold War, emancipating hundreds of millions from the oppression of communism. And since 9/11, we have freed millions of Muslims from the tyranny and brutality of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Saddam Hussein. And when there is an earthquake or tsunami or major disaster somewhere in the world, it is our military that is the global first responder. And unlike most others who have gone to war, when we go to war, we don't seek to take more land or exploit resources or impose a religion upon other countries or build an empire. We go in the name of liberty and freedom. Universal principles shared by all of mankind. Ronald Reagan said, and I quote, "Our founding documents proclaim to the world that freedom is not the sole prerogative of a chosen few. It is the universal right of all God's children." Once a year, as a country, we gather together on Veterans Day to say thanks for the gift of service, for sacrifices, for serving a cause greater than oneself, for protecting us, for standing the watch, and for putting yourself in harm's way. We thrive as a nation and benefit as individuals because of the gift of service. For those of us who have worn the uniform, every day is a day of thanks. We're thankful for the privilege of serving in the United States Armed Forces. We consider ourselves blessed to be Americans. We love America and what she stands for and recognize that this is an exceptional nation. We know that we serve because we believe, as our parents did, in America's divine providence and the justice of her cause. The valiant sacrifices of our brothers and sisters in wars past, tragic as they were worth it because they believed what we believe, that without a strong and prosperous America, the world would be a more dangerous place and America would be less free. And so we serve. In a higher sense, then, Veterans Day is our chance to say thank you to the American people. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for standing behind us, for believing us, for giving us the resolve and strength to carry out our mission. Your support and gratitude is felt by every service member. Thank you for letting us serve a noble country. William Shakespeare captured the human condition better than anyone else, in my opinion. One of his finest plays is Henry V, in which King Henry, before the Battle of Agincourt, rallies his troops with his famous St. Crispin's Day speech. His language captures the great bond, the dignity of military service, of which I speak. With apologies to Mr. Shakespeare for some small modifications, let me conclude. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he never so vile, this Veterans Day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in America now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us to preserve this blessed land, America. To the men and women of our armed forces, thank you for your service. God bless you, God bless America, and happy Veterans Day.